My name is Duke Welter, and I work as the outreach coordinator for Trout Unlimited's Driftless area restoration effort. That's known around the region as DARE, and not to be confused with the one that's in your public schools. In the past, I've served as a member of the Natural Resources Board and as the vice chair of the National Board of Trustees of Trout Unlimited, as well as a local and state leader of that organization. I live in Viroqua, Wisconsin, and I'm surrounded by 40 trout streams within 30 miles. I helped found DARE back in 2004 to help to ramp up watershed restoration projects across the 4 states of the Driftless area. Since 2010, when I began to recover from a previous career as a lawyer, I've been a TU employee. This is a lot more fun. Today I'm here on behalf both of DARE and the Wisconsin Council of Trout Unlimited. Let me advance this thing if I can. Well, maybe not. Maybe I should turn it on. Well, I'm not making progress. All right. You need to point it at the projector. Oh, thank you. All right. Well, more tips, welcome. There we are. All right. All right, that's all you need. All right. The most important message that I can offer you is don't pay any attention to that thing up here. There we go. The most important message I can offer you is for the health of our region's citizens and our children, communities, and our watersheds. It's crucial that we protect our groundwater, both in its quality and its quantity. Our rural communities and families are crying out for attention to these resources. And I saw that when I served on the Natural Resources Board, and we attempted to wrestle with manure management rules at a time when Kewanee area families were watching their kids go to the hospital with E. coli infections. And that was back in 2006. I'm not sure how much progress we've made since then. We need to understand the threats to our ground and surface waters and find effective ways to alleviate the pollution that's already going on. I'm disheartened about the growing evidence of increased pollution in our impoundments, our lakes, and in some cases in our groundwater. And I'm heartened to see you here to inquire about citizens' concerns. We shouldn't be discussing what is an acceptable level of pollution in private rural wells, but of finding ways to address that pollution. I'll talk a little bit about our organization and attempt to advance this. There we go. The mission of Trout Unlimited is to preserve, protect, and restore America's cold water watersheds. We have about 300,000 members across the country and about 6,000 members in Wisconsin, organized into about 21 chapters. We work all over the state, and we speak for scientific trout management and work to protect our cold water streams and their habitat. We educate people about the riches that they have to offer. In the Driftless area, the Driftless area restoration effort was begun in 2004 by a group of us who had worked on watershed restoration as volunteers, but looked at the extent of the problem around the region and said, at the rate we're going with restoring our habitats and our watersheds and our water quality, it'll be 10,000 years before we can address the issues that are endemic across the region. We need to figure out ways to do more and better restoration. We put together, we trained people, 500 volunteers. We brought together groups, we brought together bigger funding packages, and we worked to expand public awareness of the resource. And since we've started, we've also added to those goals, we've added challenges that come from the increased heavy rainfalls that we've been suffering across the region, that the meteorologists and the climate scientists tell us are likely to be the way of things to come. And we need to be able to deal with those because the cost to communities, the cost to our watershed are so high. What do we do with watershed projects? Let me just mention, just in case anybody is from outside this neck of the woods, you've probably been hearing the term the Driftless region, or the Driftless area, or the Coulee region, or God's country, which are all names for this neck of the woods. The reason that it's called the Driftless area goes back to the glaciers, which blessedly missed us. And they passed to the east of us because of the lowland in central Wisconsin and Lake Michigan. They passed to the west of us because of the strong bedrock foundation in northern Wisconsin that pushed those glaciers out to the west end of Lake Superior and into western Minnesota. But it missed our neck of the woods. And as a result, it didn't grind down the limestone, sandstone bedrock and pulverize it and turn this into some area that would look about like Mauston, Minnesota. Now, drift is what the rocks and boulders that are left over when a glacier recedes after it's ground down the bedrock. And early explorers and geologists and naturalists going through this area in the 1820s and 30s didn't find any of what they called glacial drift. And so they called us the Driftless area. And hence, we're one of the few areas in the world that's named for something that we haven't got. If I was a marketer, I would call that a nightmare. But as it seems, every year we see more recognition of what this marvelous area is. So, historically, we had I'm going to jump a little bit forward. Well, I guess I'm not. I'm going to jump back. This area suffered greatly in the years after settlement from land use practices that resulted in tremendous amount of millions and millions of yards of erosion that came down off the ridge tops and the hillsides and settled in the valley floors. And hence, most of the 6,000 miles of streams across the region have a thick blanket of sediment that blankets those floors, the valley floors. And while it is productive agriculturally, it also entombs phosphorus, and it also continues to erode. And about 85% of the sediment that now goes down our streams comes from those vertical, dark stream banks that are always sloughing off soil. And our recent flooding has exacerbated that. Upland conservation work in the 1930s was successful in starting to stem the flow of that soil down into the valley floors, but it still left that blanket of sediment along the valley floors. So restoration efforts since the 1980s approximately have worked to try and stabilize those streams, get rid of some of that, let that sediment pass on through and restore habitat. We're never going to put that soil back up on the hillsides where there isn't much topsoil on top of the bedrock, but we can make these streams into healthy cold water fisheries and habitat. What we've done is to, come on, there we go. We've worked all over the region since 2004. We've done about 350 projects around the region. We've raised between $65 and $75 million. Much of it comes from programs like the national, the federal farm bills, conservation titles. We've used about $22 million from that program, from those programs. Others come from Minnesota sales tax revenue, the Outdoor Heritage Amendment funding, about $20 million there. Other funding comes from the Fish and Wildlife Service and foundations, conservation organizations, and local rod and gun clubs, businesses, and individuals. When we work on these streams, and this picture that is up now is a tributary to Wamandee Creek in Buffalo County, where a whole new restoration program has developed, led by the local rod and gun clubs and helped by Trout Unlimited and NRCS and the DNR. In those areas, we get together local groups, we help with money, we get advice from experts on restoration. And now 9 or 10 miles of restoration has been carried out in that county. It costs money, about 70 to maybe 80 to $120,000 a mile, depending on how high those banks are and how much soil you have to move. But when landowners provide a public fishing easement, we find all the money from some other source. And throughout the history of this program, hardly any landowner money has had to be paid for this restoration. As a result of this work, we've had tremendous increases in the number of projects that we can do, about 200 miles of restoration since we started the program, added about 500 miles of public access since the program started. Now that's in Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. But we've had, it's been very successful, and in a lot of places we have more landowners that are willing to provide easements than we have money to do projects. What we've done, the other thing that I find really encouraging about these projects is they're community projects. The schools are out there, and the FFA is out there, and the teachers and old and young come to our stream days and begin to understand, they have a new understanding of what those streams are about. And they're the ones that can drive these things in rural areas. And they're good for rural economies. We spend the money in the local community for materials, for equipment, for labor. A lot of volunteer labor is contributed. And then, as a result of a couple of studies that we've done in 2008 and 2016, consultants that have measured the impact, economic impact of recreational angling in the Driftless area have concluded that each year we're bringing into the region $1 billion that would probably otherwise be spent elsewhere. Now we have some things that, let's see, it's also good to see in communities like Viroqua and Fenimore and Coon Valley and River Falls, impact of that economic boost on the economy. It's diversifying it, and that's good. And we're waiting, you know, Westby's got this mascot as you come into town from the south on Highway 14 on the left, and we're just kind of waiting for, you know, as the trout economy develops, to see whether Westby might change its mascot a little bit to kind of reflect the trout opportunity that you see in that area. That's just an artist's conception. You can find plenty of good information on the history of erosion in the Mississippi River Hill Country over the last 125 years. From the 1935 floods in the upper left, the gully erosion in 1890 near Melrose in the lower left, and on the right, the Kickapoo flooding with the kayaker heading down in Reedstown to see his and his mother's houses, which were both ruined, and the picnic table perched on top of the highway sign in Ontario in early September last year. I can talk with you if you wish about the work that's done and how we do it, but I don't want to take the time with the details right now. But suffice it to say that when we do this work, we're reducing sediment, we're buffering these streams against erosion. We're asking landowners who provide a 33-foot easement on each side of the stream, wherever possible, to put a 40-foot grass strip next to that riparian strip, so that before you get to the cropland. That way the sediment and other nutrients that are coming out of the cropland get caught by that grass and they don't end up in the stream. So after flooding, you'll look at a lot of places across the Driftless area that have a tremendous amount of water coming up, beating against vertical banks, going out into people's cropland and pastures. And in these restored areas, there isn't any of that. Those are stable through these things. There's no damage to them. Camp Creek near Viola is that's a 40-acre pasture. You can see the Angus hatch in there right now while the restoration's going on. That restoration is held up for 15 years, and it has had no damage despite a lot of flooding events. And you know, I have to say the landowners that we work with are, well, happy with it, mostly. Now, there are a few things that we think that it would be valuable for state legislators to address. One of them is to help us with more support for water quality testing across the region. This is not only surface water, but groundwater. We're finding some spot efforts, such as in Iowa and Lafayette counties recently, and also in the Tater Creek watershed, where private wells were tested, and there's a concerning level of nitrates and of bacteria in a lot of those wells. It's not at the level that Kewaunee County has right now, but it does suggest that we're going to have to do something about it. Our group is testing this summer a new monitoring application that you can take a test strip in the water, take a picture of it, and send it in for analysis and the program's been developed by 3 PhDs and a professional water quality monitor, so I don't understand it at all, but it sounds like a pretty good tool. I think oversight of CAFOs and manure management and handling compliance is a matter of utmost concern. In our county, we've just had the second fish kill caused by sloppy manure handling, unintended I suppose, from a single CAFO in just 18 months. We've had fish kills on an excellent trout stream that the public enjoys fishing and has spent money for restoring. And the first case hasn't been adjudicated yet, and now we have another one. DNR hasn't had enough resources to adequately oversee those facilities. And we're on pace for a record number of manure spills this year. I thought when we were trying to address this in 2006 and 2007 as a natural resource report, that 60 fish kills were a whopping big worrisome number. But it looks like this year we're heading toward 100 manure spills. We really need to have more people on the ground that are able to work with CAFOs and make sure that they're following the rules. And I think the rules involving these last two fish kills have both been caused by a manure handling subcontractor whose hoses parted and caused significant fish kills. Another one was down on Castle Rock a couple of years ago, and that was again it was a parted hose that failed and caused some pretty severe damage to an excellent trout stream. Groundwater protection is important to us in the Driftless area, just as in the Central Sands, and we should have a goal of trying to protect that groundwater both in quantity and in quality. We should be also working to clean up pollution sources and not let them reach it. DNR's permitting authority over groundwater needs to be straightened out. We urge you to pass this session or soon statutory language that codifies the Lake Beulah decision, which allowed the DNR to consider cumulative impacts of high-cap wells in light of the surrounding water quality or water usage. That would stop this ping pong ball effect of bouncing around from one approach to another of regulation and recognize that the public trust doctrine gives sufficient underpinning for the DNR to consider cumulative impacts in permit decisions. Really, are we being served well by an AG's opinion that undermines the gist of a Supreme Court decision that interprets the Constitution of the state? I don't think we are. I think we need to make some progress in sorting that out. This session, you will be asked, or members of the Senate have already been asked, to consider the phosphorus trading credit clearinghouse. That would be SB 91. Senate has already unanimously passed it and sent it on to the Assembly. I urge you to pass that. It would ease the way for many municipalities to have a streamlined way to make decisions about whether to upgrade their wastewater treatment plants at significant expense or put lesser amounts of funding into watershed restoration upstream, and which probably would have more effect on phosphorus reduction than the upgrades to the wastewater treatment plants. So we've had municipalities that have already done that. Richland Center on Pine River, Sparta on Beaver Creek, Montfort on the Blue River system, and they've had significant impacts on those streams and saved a lot of money. But we have also talked to a lot of wastewater treatment plants that are under orders to reduce their phosphorus output, and they have not wanted to climb the whole ladder without a streamlined process in place. So when you have the chance to consider SB 91 or its companion bill in the Assembly, I hope that you will pass it and send it on to the governor for his signature. We are still concerned about groundwater quality. Well, if you're following along on the PowerPoint, I wanted to show you a typical situation in Iowa and Grant County on an outstanding project down that way. The Blue River project has been underway since we started there. They've done about 20 projects, and they'll do a couple more in the next year. The kind of bank problems that they have in the Blue River system are as challenging as anywhere in the Driftless area, and it's all agricultural working land, so these are pastures. But if you look at the picture in the upper right, those banks were 10 or 11 feet high before, and vertical and eroding. And if you happen to be down there in a rainstorm, you could stand there and watch the soil slough off those banks into the river. The project in 2017 sculpted those banks back, and now when the water gets high, it doesn't beat them up. It eases its way out over the floodplain and into that grassy area, and it doesn't cause any damage. So it's improved the sedimentation by 500 tons a year and 120 pounds of less phosphorus going down a year. And the whole project has reduced soil loss by over 5,000 tons a year and several thousand pounds of phosphorus. Those are good illustrations of the idea that working upstream in these watersheds can have a significant impact downstream. And that affects municipalities because they don't have to treat their water as much. It also, if you want to go farther downstream, it affects the Gulf of Mexico because the phosphorus gets to the Gulf of Mexico and it creates a dead zone where there's no oxygen in the water, and it's pretty much ruined the marine environment for living things. We in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and Iowa are what's creating the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So groundwater and surface water protection is something that we should be thinking about because in 2001, some of you may remember, the Perrier Company, a subsidiary of Nestle, proposed to bottle the springs of the McCann River in central Wisconsin and Marquette County. The governor was behind the program, and a lot of people who know that river said this would not be good for that river. And we looked at it, and we did not have a statutory leg to stand on. And the only reason that stopped was because we finally convinced legislators and outdoors people and other policymakers that it wasn't a good place to do that, and we needed more groundwater protection. Eventually, Perrier went to Michigan and started a big plant there that has depressed groundwater in its own area. We worked after that incident with other groups and with the leadership of Duane Johns group, former state representative from Eastman, who was an outstanding member and chair of the Natural Resources Committee. And the Trout Unlimited and the River Alliance and the potato growers and either the realtors or the developers, I'm not sure which, sat down at the table and hashed out a new groundwater protection law. And in 2003, that was passed. And it was a good start. It was a good step in the right direction. But you know, there are other people that are looking at bottling these waters, and which could have an impact on some of these amazing streams. such as the one that was proposed for Copper Creek a few years ago in Crawford County, which would have removed about 40% of the flow of Copper Creek for bottling. Eventually that was stopped, but we still have a need to take another look at that and revisit it and see what we can do to strengthen it. As a final matter, we work a lot with county land conservation departments, and you'll hear from some of the county conservationists a little later on. But I can tell you, in the work that I've done with them, they are the frontline people in our counties that are doing conservation work. They're in touch with landowners, they're in touch with the county board, they know programs that can help things in our counties. They're well respected and they're well trained, and they're so taxed beyond their resources by the challenges that we face that they need some help. And we hope that you'll see fit to invest in some staff help for these county land conservation departments. 2 or 3 additional employees would not be a huge cost across the state, and they would have a huge impact. So I hope you will find a way to support that funding. We just have this magnificent region here, and we have the opportunity to speak for it, or to work for it, or to let things slide. And it's kind of up to us to try and figure out what we can do to help. I hope that some of the ideas that I've suggested today will help in that direction, and I'll look forward to working with you as the opportunity arises. So thank you for your time today, and if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to do what I can to answer them.
Thank you very much. I think any of us in the rural districts appreciate all of what Trout Unlimited does. So I really appreciate all the work you and all your group do. It's tremendous. And I see the effects of it. Just a couple of quick questions. You said 2004 is when kind of you started. You said you were doing some spot testing of streams and stuff and water. Do you have data back to 2004 on that? Or is that just recent?
Yes, our chapters in the Driftless area and in the rest of the state. We're not uniform around the state. But yes, we have had monitoring programs going in select areas. Central Sands, yes. Iowa and Grant counties, yes. There's been a monitoring program there that's been sponsored by UW-Platteville. Yes. The work that we do affects temperatures, and it affects drought resistance of these streams, because in a stream that's really incised with steep banks and is getting beat up in a flood event, that water blows on through, and it takes a lot of phosphorus and a lot of sediment with it. In areas where we have done this work and sloped back the banks and recreated a floodplain, a fair amount of that water gets reabsorbed into the area along the stream. So if you have a flooding event followed in the next year or two by a drought period, that stream is more resilient because it has absorbed more groundwater. And we find that after a flood event, the base flow in that stream is increased somewhat. And I'm not a groundwater hydrologist by any means. I'm just a liberal arts guy. But that's so consistently seen around the area that we believe that restoration is having a real significant impact. And then the monitoring of invertebrate populations, the insects and crustaceans, and the monitoring of the fish population often shows dramatic increase in those populations, probably related to combination of temperature and sediment. But we can watch in a degraded stream, you'll have a few species of critters, mayflies and caddis and freshwater shrimp or scuds that are among the more tolerant species, more tolerant of degradation. And there won't be very many individuals of those species. But after you clear out the sediment and you open up the stream and allow some vegetation to be growing and some gravel to be exposed, you'll see a an explosion, not only of species, but the individuals, as the habitat is better. And you'll also see often a tenfold increase in the fish population from the sculpins and the dace to the whitefish and the trout. I'm sorry, the white suckers and the trout. So yes.
Cool, and just, you brought up SB 191, the Pollution Trade. Good timing, it's in my local government, it's in the committee we're having here next week.
Wonderful.
So.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you. Representative Crandall?
Thank you. I was just curious, the picture that you shared of Blue River in Iowa County, so that's that bank that you removed all the sediment from, and you put it, is that how it is now? Is that how it was? Is that natural?
Let me just jump back to that picture, so we're looking at the same one. The one with the green grass on the shore now, yes, that's how it looks now, and it's a grazed pasture. So
that's how it was prior to...
No, the upper right one with the vertical banks, and you can barely see the tree in the background.
No, I understand that, but at one time was it like this before we had all of the erosion?
Well, you know, if you go back to the accounts of the settlers, they describe oak savannas in these valley floors, or what they would call a wet prairie, like another term for it is a sedge meadow or a mesic prairie. So they're soggy, but they have a defined stream thread flowing through it. Probably, from all the accounts that I've seen, they were gravel bottom streams, and they had lots of brook trout in them. So it wasn't, you know, settlement here took place, depending on the Driftless area, from the 1830-ish to the 1880s. And people were farming a lot of wheat in the early days. But the catastrophic sediment loss didn't start really until about the 1890s. That's when that gully that I showed you that was many times higher than the guy on the horse, from the 1890s to the 1930s maybe, was when the bulk of that took place.
Thank you. Representative Randall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are we on here?
Okay.
I've got three subject type questions. First thing I want to say is thank you so very much for coming today. Your testimony is outstanding. You articulated your information very well, and I see you more than a liberal arts guy. I see you as a subject matter expert, boots on the ground. You've been places that we need to hear from so that we can build some summary data and take some action. So, and that said, your to-do comments, your requests that you got, I thought a couple of them were rather interesting. When you say more support needed for testing, can you qualify that? Is there dollars? Is it numbers of people? Is it time? Is it, what does that mean?
Well, one of the most optimistic things, groups that I've been working with recently is the Gainer Creek Farmer-Led Watershed Council. And that's in the Soldiers Grove, Gays Mills areas. It's one of the biggest tributaries of the Kickapoo. And it has, like many streams in the Driftless area, it has very high quality water in the sense of reliable flows, reliable temperatures, very fertile with the calcites that come from the bedrock. But it has beat up habitat. And there are ongoing challenges to the habitat that have taken place despite our efforts. We've had more erosion from uplands as we have lost conservation and hay ground on the uplands. And so more water is coming down off the uplands through dry runs, and that's bringing a lot of cobble and a lot more sediment. So I apologize.
You're an attorney.
But where I'm going is it dollars? Is it resource numbers? Both?
Well, the Gainer Creek Group has had some grant money from DATCAP that is available to applying farmer-led groups. And I tell you, I've watched those groups in Iowa and Minnesota and Wisconsin, and different parts of Wisconsin, and they're locally generated folks. They're opinion leaders in the farming community in their areas. They're very varied in that they have beef grazers, they have dairy farmers, they have people that do corn and beans, there are people that do dairy and corn and beans, there are people that do that do organic, and they've been getting together and doing things that are good for that watershed. The discussions that they're having are bringing in a lot of their neighbors who are going, well, you know, if you folks are interested in this, and it seems to be showing up well for our watershed, you know, maybe I'll give it a try. Cover crop money, private well water testing. They got a grant to help with that, and they did. I think they did 50 wells as a first set, and there was such a good response to that from people in the area that they applied for some more money from DECGET, and they got that, and they're going to be doing some more water quality testing. So I can't quantify that. But I can tell you that the state's efforts to encourage the formation and the work of these farmer-led watershed councils is really money well spent. And it's having an impact in that watershed, in the Red Cedar River watershed, and other places. I can't give you a dollar figure, but
That's okay. Thank you for the feedback. I'll just trim it back to just one final question.
and I'll try to trim back.
In your experience, this is off the wall now, because I had a in-district event last night in my district, which is east of here. The issue of salvage yards, junkyards, whether they're business-based with damaged vehicles that just kind of pile up, or someone's personal property that looks like a junkyard. Do you have any experience in that type of exposure regarding groundwater effect and seepage and contaminants or not? Kind of a little quick answer, yes or no, and if you have something, maybe a little detail. If not, that's okay. I'm just curious.
Well, we call that way up in the cooler.
Okay. So not so much around there.
Well, no, I mean,
He means that.
there are a lot of coolies that are you know, unregulated, collecting places for old vehicles, but I haven't heard much that would suggest people are looking into that. It's like the smallest kind of brownfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Kitchens.
Okay, yeah, thanks for your testimony. I appreciate the work of Trout Unlimited. So you talked about the increased number of manure spills and the need for better, tighter regulations and more enforcement. And I certainly agree that when people deliberately break the law, we need to come down on them. But the examples you gave, and sort of my experience too, is that most of those come from either equipment failure or human error. And, you know, I guess I'd like you to comment on that. Part of what I was going to ask about too is the need to include farmers in the solutions, which I think Representative Rankin kind of got into that a little bit with the producer-led watershed program. And I think that certainly the nutrient credit bill is going to help to encourage that cooperation with the farmers. But anyway, I guess if you could comment on some of that.
You know, we've had a number of notable fish kills that I've been familiar with in the Driftless area in the last 3 or 4 years. And one of the things that I've found is that talking with farmers in those areas, I have had more of them say to me, that kind of thing gives all farmers a bad name, and they don't like it. And I've also had people say, there's only 3 or 2 or 1 farmer in this county that is careless enough about their practices that they would be likely to cause an event like this. And everybody knows who they are. I don't think it's good for the farming community to have those events, and I think farmers recognize it. We work with farmers on almost all of our projects, and they're the ones that are concerned. They're having a project because they're concerned about the quality of their watershed and the usability of their lands. But people who are careless about their practices, how would you say it? Give everybody a black eye. I also think that there are times when the eventual enforcement action doesn't amount to much, and that is a matter that usually goes to a local district attorney for decision making, with the lawyer for the farmer or whoever caused the fish kill. But we have seen forfeitures that are not particularly significant for a significant fish kill. And about the only redeeming feature that I can take out of that is that when you have a fish kill, you can end up being required to have a nutrient management plan, which, if we are overseeing appropriately, can improve your manure handling practices. So we are, when you say careless, I understand there are accidents that happen, but I also understand that when I hire somebody to do my spreading and they have a spill because they were careless, that ultimately it's my responsibility. And if we have another spill caused by the practices of the same contractor, that should be a shame on me for hiring that. We need to do more in a number of areas to try and reduce those kinds of spills.